Well, it's really good to have you joining us on this Facebook and YouTube live stream. My name's Simon Goddard. I lead FX resourcing within the Fresh Expressions movement in the UK. And I'm really pleased to be hosting this conversation about well-being and the Fresh Expressions journey. I've got three practitioners in well-being that we're looking forward to hearing from. And the way this hour is going to work is that I'm going to invite each of them to talk about what they're up to, what their organization is involved in terms of well-being for about 10 minutes. We're going to hear, first of all, Rachel Jordan Wolfe from Hope. We're going to hear from Andy Freeman, who heads up something called Space to Breathe in Sheffield, offers wellbeing in the workplace. And then we're going to hear from Ruth Rice, who is involved in Renew Wellbeing, places across the UK where it's okay not to be okay. So without any hesitation, I'm going to invite Rachel up in a moment. If there are any questions or comments that you want to make on this video as we go through, do put those in. The speakers will see them, but we may well come back in the second half of this hour, and we hope this will be about an hour as conversation. The second half will be about conversation, so we'll engage with some of those questions. We'll answer questions, we'll talk with one another and try and involve you in that conversation as well. So without any further ado, let me bring Rachel up. Rachel, do introduce yourself, where you're from. I'll disappear and I'll be back in about 10 minutes. So do tell us what.
Great. Thank you so much, Simon. Hello, I'm Rachel Jordan Wolfe. I'm the Executive Director of Hope Together, and I'm living here in London, and like you, we're all in lockdown together. So yeah, I'm in London. I'm part of a church called Christ Church Spitalfields, and here to talk with you today about well-being. Now, well-being, maybe it was a term that some people talked about, but now it's a term I just feel like everybody's talking about it. And that's because obviously we've been through almost, I was going to say, collective trauma. We've been through a really big experience, and all of us, there's not one of our lives that hasn't been impacted or touched in some way by what we've been going through together during this pandemic. And that's had an impact on all different bits of our lives. I was thinking, we all want to go back to normal. We're not even sure what normal will be when we get out of this. What is normal? But what we do know is that we've all faced and are facing something together. And for some of us, it's had a bigger impact than for others. But for all of us, it has had an impact. And I just think that came really live to me. We had our little Zoom midweek group the other day, and everyone was talking about the impact, whether that had been their physical well-being because they had had COVID and were struggling with long COVID, or still had COVID symptoms, whether it was just the way that their jobs had changed so dramatically, whether it was because they're being isolated, whether it's because they're spending hours on Zoom. What is that doing us for our well-being? I know we're on Zoom again right now, or on, you're watching this on a screen. We've got all this screen time, but in every different area, our lives have been massively impacted. And as we went into that third lockdown, I don't know about you, but that first week felt really long. Just trying to, if you like, you felt like the walls, I felt like the walls were coming in around me much more tighter. And it was a much tougher challenge as we went into that third lockdown to keep ourselves going, to keep ourselves, if you like, on a path of where we're flourishing. And that's really about well-being. And so at this time, I've been on a journey with some other people, Kingsgate Church in particular. A guy called Dave Smith had written a book and run a series in his church all about well-being. They'd run it before the pandemic, and people were really interested. The council had been really interested, lots of people interested. And so as we began to face the pandemic, they got in touch and said, look, we need to turn this into a course for everybody. A well-being course that would really help, comes out of God's perspective, but would be suitable, that actually the council could run it if they wanted to. They could take it, they could put it into all different places and spaces. And so last year, we a bit of a Herculean thing, but managed to create the well-being journey. It's a series that people can do. You can do that in your community, in a sports club, obviously all online at the moment, and looking through 8 different parts of our well-being. It's not like going to do deep counselling with people, but it is going to get people talking, and it is going to get us to address and even to speak about what we're all facing as a challenge. So it goes through introduction, well-being mindset, physical well-being, emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, relational well-being, financial well-being, and vocational well-being. And really, to give you a taster, the best thing I could possibly do is show you a promo. But this course, we found churches are finding they're running it, but lots of take-up is happening in their communities, because this is an area that everyone together is facing. And it's based on, out of that passage in Isaiah where we call Jesus the Prince of Peace. That word peace is shalom. That word shalom is actually peace in all areas, if you like, well-being in all areas of our life. And that is, if you like, the kind of bedrock of what this is based on. And we've had some great reports. People have only just started it. It's January. We launched it January the 17th. People are only in like week 2 or week 3 if they're ahead. And just getting great reports of the impact it's having, the ability it's helping people to talk, and how many people are inviting their friends and finding it's a real gift to their communities that we get to talk about this together. So I'm going to show you the promo.
Welcome to the Wellbeing Journey.
And what a journey it's going to be, because right throughout this, we're going to be exploring why our well-being is so important and how we go about developing a positive well-being mindset.
Yes, this series is based on Dave Smith's book, God's Plan for Your Wellbeing. But it's not just for Christians, it's for everyone. And every area of our wellbeing needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and well-being covers areas like our spiritual well-being, emotional, vocational, financial, and sometimes in those areas of life, a little bit like these cars, which hopefully have full fuel tanks at the moment, but in those areas, our fuel tank gauge feels very much empty. Throughout this series, we'll try and help you top up those areas.
Yeah, and we're going to be chatting to experts, teachers, and hearing real life stories.
So if we look back at the big picture of the Bible, we see there's a good God who loves us. He has a plan for us to flourish and enjoy well-being in every area of our lives.
Nutrition, sleep, physical exercise, and you're like, whoa, where do I start? I often say to people, small steps in the right direction over a long period of time have huge benefits to our lives.
And I think that's a really kind of biblical, godly kind of characteristic, actually, to not be somebody who easily takes offence, and so to be somebody who forgives easily.
I've often thought, you know what, if I really believed the Father knew my name, if I really truly got, not just in my head, but in my belly, that the Lord of heaven and earth called me his son, how my head would lift.
There's some brilliant resources that accompany this series, and there's also a youth course that runs alongside this, and there's lots of youth resources as well. Joanna, how are you feeling today?
Oh, Simon, I feel good. Now, if you'd like to join us on the journey, we would love you to. So why don't you head over to wellbeingjourney.org.
Thank you. So that is our promo. You can get a leader's guide, a resource guide, and there is a whole youth package as well that's in a much more youthy vein with lots of challenges with 4 young people who go through the journey together. And we would love you to have a go. We'd love your feedback. And you can find it all on the wellbeingjourney.org website. I'm going to hand back over to Simon.
Brilliant, thank you, Rachel. Rachel, we'll come back to you later and perhaps hear a bit more about that. And I'm going to move on to Andy now. Andy and I, Andy's been involved with Fresh Expressions over a number of years, and now your energy is focused on Space to Breathe. So, Andy, I'm just going to let you talk about Space to Breathe for 10 minutes or so, and look forward to hear from you about that.
Thanks so much, Simon. It's nice to see you all. So Space to Breathe and my kind of journey has been quite a long one in this kind of subject. And I think a little bit like Rachel mentioned, although, you know, this has become a much more high profile issue recently during the pandemic and before that, the kind of seeds of thinking about people's well-being and exploring how to support people in their mental health has been something that's been around with me for probably the best part of 20 years. But the particular kind of moment that began to affect me, I used to work with the 24/7 prayer movement. And when I began to meet people who were coming into church prayer rooms who didn't really have anything to do with church or faith often would speak about being agnostic or atheistic in their kind of perspective on faith and religion. And yet we're coming into these prayer rooms and engaging with them. That kind of sparked some interest with me. And this is kind of like late 90s, beginning to think, well, why are people coming to experience prayer and spirituality when they don't seem to be connected with the church? And of course, as my mindset widened and my understanding of what that issue was, it was probably tapping into the early beginnings of what we would now talk about as being people who are spiritual but not religious. And that captivated my imagination. So began to work with people who were on the fringes or kind of way outside of kind of church settings and say, well, why are you interested in spirituality and what does that look like? And how can I help you with that? I guess, you know, in terms of a kind of a mission idea, that I was trusting that God was present in that sense of inquiry, and how could I engage with what God was doing in the midst of people's lives outside of the normal kind of realms of how we do church. And as I began to dig into that, I found that spirituality and well-being were very closely linked. That as people began to see a sense of meaning through various things like mindfulness, different kind of exploratory kind of spiritualities, or picking and choosing different things from different kind of faiths or streams or traditions, began to find that their well-being was very central to that. And of course, over time, mindfulness has become a core kind of treatment that the things that the NHS will use to help with people's mental health and well-being. But at its roots is some ideas around spirituality that really captivated me. So I began to try exploring some ideas, and 4 years ago started Space to Breathe as a community interest company, where we want to try and encourage people to live well, live fully, and live deeply. And we work in any kind of sphere of life, which has taken us into workplaces, but also now doing a lot of work with the NHS and working with people in clinical and non-clinical kind of mental health settings, supporting the staff within the NHS, supporting teachers while they do their job and incredible stresses that they're under, supporting community workers, and then making things available to the general public. So we will bring our brand of and our style of mindfulness and meditation to the wellbeing sphere. As somebody who's grown up in the church, Ignatian spirituality felt like something that had a real strong connection with mindfulness. So we'll bring an Ignatian view to mindfulness. If you've not come across things like the Examen and Lectio Divina, that kind of ruminating spirituality, but at its heart, something that also says, and what will I do tomorrow? So what does that bring into the whole mindfulness sphere? When we're thinking about reflecting on ourselves and being self-aware about our own mental health, we get into kind of questions about how can I understand who I am? And I feel like 30 years of going to church has taught me quite a lot about how Christians do that. So how can I then apply that to people who don't come from that background? Using images, candles. And why are we so captivated by lighting a candle? And what does that do when we do that? And what does that speak to our well-being? And then also using practical tools and reflective ideas that I've learned over my time working in the church. So sort of Ignatian traditions, but also some of the monastic traditions, some of the more contemporary kind of ideas around art and image and music, trying to integrate these ideas into everyday well-being so that anybody from any faith background or no faith background can engage with it. Now, I know we're going to talk at some point in this session about what does well-being mean to church and faith. And one of the dynamics you need to know about me is that I'm not trying to start a church. As a community interest company, we can't do that legally. We want to reach out to people of all faiths or no faiths. But also, it felt important to me that as people were having these conversations way before they'd started thinking about faith development, attending church, what their own spirituality was, I thought it was important for me to go and be with them. So if you like, missionally, we're playing backfield for the church. We're hoping that as we encourage people to think, is there more to life? Then also in time, other things may happen. But one of the kind of questions around that is, of course, you could take a number of different journeys with what you decide to do with a spark of faith or belief or spirituality that comes from thinking, is there more to life? And it again speaks into this idea of where mission starts, that our belief is that the Missio Dei, the idea that God starts mission before we do, and that God's mission started by the Father sending the Son. and the Father and Son sending the Holy Spirit, and the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit sending the church, that we're joining in with something God's doing already, that we're confident that when I meet somebody who has a question around the meaning of life or their well-being, that God's present with me. And I'm going to trust him on that journey. But it may well be we're handing that on to somebody else, so we don't know the outcomes of those kind of questions. And I'd love to talk some more about that later if anybody wants to. So we're trying to bring spirituality and well-being together. But I'm also, over time, have begun to realize, and again, this is something that's come up through the pandemic, of some of the inequalities that exist within the way we talk about well-being and mental health. I began to notice that the audiences for the things we're doing felt predominantly people like me, white, middle class. That there was a sense of being in control of some elements of your life and well-being adding to that. And we're all for well-being being for everybody, that everybody needs to have this conversation, and that human flourishing is something that we can talk about, as well as the challenges of mental health. But when you begin to go and visit a mental health facility, or when you begin to talk to mental health workers in the NHS, you realize that that's not the picture of mental health in those places. In Sheffield, for example, although only 19% of the population is from a Black, Asian or ethnic minority background, 46% of people in secure mental health settings in Sheffield are from Black, Asian or ethnic minority backgrounds. That doesn't feel right. No, it isn't right. But then also links to urban poverty, links to unemployment. And so trying to make well-being available to all and make well-being simple so that it's accessible from whatever background you come from has become something that we've also sought to develop. So we want to try these ideas out and work with people and support people who are in long-term residential mental health settings. We want to support people as they grapple with the complexities of life, and that well-being be something that supports them as they face unemployment or long-term kind of family or personal issues, as they build their lives back together, to find that same sense of stability. And again, we found that spirituality is an important tool in that. If you're coming from different ethnic backgrounds, faith is often something you're bringing with you. So how can we give voice to that? And we've begun to think about, with people from other faith backgrounds, about how self-care can be worship. God has entrusted us with this body. How can we care for it with honor and dignity, honoring the God that we believe in? And also that sense of social justice, that spirituality coming from certainly the places that I've learned it and the inspiration of Jesus, going to the margins, going to people excluded, welcoming everybody. And how can we do that with well-being? So how can we talk about things, use stories, use inspirational figures, use experiences, use tools that actually connect with anybody, whatever their background? And so that's been part of our journey as well. And there's more I can say about all those kind of things. I'm conscious I'm probably talking too much. So spacetobreatheuk.com is our website. You can have a look on there. There's a number of different resources and things that you can come and try, and do come and talk to us some more. Our journey's kind of just beginning, and we're learning so much from so many other different organizations. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation and seeing what other perspectives and people and questions people are going to raise. But Simon, I think probably I'll leave it there for the moment. Hand back to you, if that's all right.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. Really appreciate what you shared and what you're doing in Sheffield and beyond. I'm going to hand over to Ruth now. Let me just add her to the screen there. Brilliant. Looking forward to what you've got to say as well, Ruth, and then we'll have a conversation together. But do share with us what you're doing with Renew Wellbeing.
Thank you, Simon, our guru in all things online. We love you. So it's great to be invited to talk about Renew Wellbeing, and what a delight to share some time with people who are all talking wellbeing. Over the time that I've been setting up this charity, that has not always been the case. And so if anything, at least we're all talking about wellbeing right now, and I'm delighted that you've joined us to do this. My story is the story of setting up Renew Wellbeing was really a bit of a broken personal one. My life like a cup in God's hands. I was one of those Christians who was like always full to overflowing and wanted to change the world. And in doing so, I kind of broke myself a bit. So I overdid it all, really. And I ended up having a massive breakdown. I've been a teacher for 20 years. I got kids, and I just, leading in the church, I just didn't look after myself very well. Now, of course, I'm not saying that people's mental and emotional health issues are always that. Mine was burnout. For a lot of people, there's just no rhyme or reason to it at all. And even before this pandemic, we were looking at 1 in 4 people who've experienced some sort of diagnosable mental illness at some point in their lives, or mental challenge. So it's really interesting to me that we now find ourselves in a place where we're all talking about well-being. For me, it was that my cup emptied overnight. I almost don't do this. I've just been drinking out of it, but I think it'll be right. My cup emptied overnight, and I ended up having this massive burnout where, I have just dripped all over the place. That happens. Where I just found myself completely empty of all the stuff that I thought was giving me life, all the flourishing, knowing Jesus and reading the Bible and praying, going to church, serving other people, teaching, it all just disappeared. I found myself lying in my bed watching reruns of Dallas. That's how bad it got. I knew I wasn't okay. But even then, I found it so hard to go to the doctor and ask for help for my mental and emotional health. I found church really difficult, and I'm part of a lovely, lovely church, a Baptist church here in Nottingham that I went on to lead full time. Delightful people, but everyone wanted me to be better. And so the questions were, how are you? Are you all right now? And the whole idea of well-being, almost like a pressure, almost like it's attached to being a Christian that we should be flourishing. And therefore, when you aren't, if well-being, as it's described in the Journal of Wellbeing that medical people might use, is a sort of seesaw, and on one side are your challenges and on the other are your resources, and the middle bit is where you get your balance, and that's well-being. If on your resources end is your faith, God the Father, Son and Holy Spirit, all the resources of heaven, you feel terrible when you get out of balance because you think it must be your fault. And so I got very isolated and very anxious, and I felt I couldn't really be with God's people, the people I really needed to be with. What I found during that time was I wasn't the only one. There were loads of people who were struggling and probably wouldn't have thought church was the first place to go. Which is a shame, because when I heard about the 5 ways to well-being that you might have heard about, the New Economics Foundation did a big piece of research. Connecting, learning, getting active, taking notice, giving are the 5 things people need for their well-being. And I would say the 5 things that a local church does really well. We're connecting, we're learning, we're getting active, we take notice, we give. It's what we do. We've been doing it for centuries. So why was the connection not being made between people who were struggling with anxiety and depression and the local church, which is a lovely family? At its best, it's a lovely family. And so coming out of my time of my year, really, of severe sort of low mood and emptiness, I'd found habits of contemplation. So really interesting what you were saying there, Andy, too. Contemplation, meditation, the Psalms, rhythms of prayer, really helpful. And I began to share those with the church I was part of that I'd then begun to be the full-time leader of, which is a story for another day. In fact, if you are interested in the story, shameless plug, Slow Down, Show Up and Pray has just come out. It's the story of how I ended up leading that charity and what God's up to, and also the manual of how you can set up spaces that I'm going to describe to you. So these rhythms of prayer, feeling like if I sat still in the morning and I held my cuppa until it was empty, and then I meditated on a little phrase from a psalm, that this cup was like my life in God's hands, that he was holding me. I was held in a bigger story. And the simple habits, the everyday things like sitting still and the world still spinning and it not being me that did it, of holding the cup and knowing I was held, of taking a psalm and taking it into with my in-breath and my out-breath and just taking those words of truth into my inner being. Those things became really life and health to me, and I wanted to share those with people. And I couldn't believe that I was leading a church and yet I was having to drive to retreat centres to find rhythms of prayer like this. So the dream for me was, let's have this on the high street. Let's have our prayer rhythms, the things that bring us life in the presence of God, available to anyone, really simply, wherever we are being God's people. We need to be the people of prayer, but we need to do it in a way that anyone can join in. Plus, selfishly, I needed people to do this with me because I'm not very good at looking after myself on my own. I don't know if any of us are. And so we ended up with a little space on a high street here in Nottingham that God kind of led us to. It's next to an existing cafe. We share premises with the cafe. So our space looks like a cafe, but it feels like a shared front room. You can get tea and coffee from next door. We don't need to be standing behind a counter serving people. We can sit at table, attend to our well-being, bring a hobby, share a hobby, any faith and none. We're all equal when it comes to mental health. We're all only experts in our own well-being. And so people would bring in things like a jigsaw, or maybe a bit of colouring, or maybe some furniture restoration, or teaching us how to grow stuff in boxes that they'd made. And basically, there was so much creativity in the space because we're not just our mental health labels. And so what we'd do was people would come in, we'd say, and they'd go, "Great Taylor, woe," and we'd say, "I'm so sorry that's happening for you. Let's signpost you to where you can get some help with that. And would you like to try one of these activities, or what would you like to do? And we'll make it happen." So it's a strength-based approach with good partnership with mental health services so we could signpost on. So being present, showing up at least once a week in a space where people could get at it when you say you're going to be there. Being in partnership with mental health services in a real way that meant that we could signpost on and they could signpost in, and we could work together. And then also being prayerful. So taking a prayer space attached to the cafe space. So imagine you've got a sort of a smallish cafe style space, can be in a church building, doesn't matter where really, can be outside, but you've also got a quiet space attached to it. So like Andy was talking about, you don't take your spiritual habits and divorce them from your social action. You stick them together, and then people can wander between the two. If somebody just wants to colour in for 5 minutes and go home again and not talk about God at all, they're not interested, that's fine. They've had a place to be. They're known by name, not label, and they know that they're valued for who they are. We don't need to jump you through a hoop of, "Are you better yet? Are you better yet?" With the church, we're going to keep showing up. We know it's okay not to be okay. That's the gospel. None of us are okay. He holds us. He is the big okay around us all. And so being able to just show up, be honest, not have to be the people who had the well-being to give away, it took the pressure off. And it was good for the church. It was good for the community. We could learn from one another. And then when we'd say, "We're going to pray now, we pray at this time, this is how we pray, you're welcome to join in." Some people did, some people didn't, but increasingly people began to want to pray because we made it simple enough. 5 minutes, go through a psalm. 5 minutes, we do the Lord's Prayer. 5 minutes, we do examine, rewind the day with God. And so these habits of prayer and having a space where people could go and sit and be quiet, be on their own, but in company, these things have brought life to many people. So it went from one space in Nottingham to 50 spaces over the course of 3 years. I gave up the day job and set up Renew Wellbeing to help churches be present, be prayerful, be in partnership. And then we thought, oh, lockdown's happened, it'll all stop. Do you know what? God was just up to something there, and I didn't really like technology, and now I have to. All our training is now online, so now we invite you to join a webinar. We do them every Monday, and then once you've had the introduction to what Renew Wellbeing is, we give you the code to the website resources. You help yourself to the training that's on there, and then you get going when you're ready. You sign up with us just to say that you'll keep it simple so that we keep building good reputation with mental health services. I don't know why any church wouldn't want a space like this, where it's okay not to be okay, where prayer is our main language and we make that available to all, but where we all have a language of well-being that we share, where anybody can come and be human. I think I have, for myself personally, benefited so much from being part of a Renew space. And I sometimes say to churches who are setting up, set up your Renew space, and your Renew space will teach you how to be church. And the people who've come to faith, I can see faith communities growing on the back of these Renew spaces. During lockdown, of course, we've had to go on Zoom a lot, and we've worked out how to do Zoom Renews, and they're not great, but they're better than nothing. And some people have, when we were able to go outdoors, we can do them there. So we've got a variety of advice for how you can do this. And of course, you are allowed to open in person for small groups, for support for those who can't manage technology in any other way if you're able to, and we've got advice for that as well. So everything's in the book, and the manual's in the book, and we're offering kind of book group style approaches. The bigread.co.uk has got a sort of 6-week guide to how to go through the book together as a church, and that can really help too. So there's lots of routes in, or you can just help yourself to the free resources off the website. I'm not trying to push the book, it's got the whole story and the manual in there, so you might want to have a little look at that too. Thanks, Simon. That's just about it. That's renewwellbeing.org.uk if you're interested.
Brilliant, thank you, Ruth, and to Rachel and to Andy. I'm just going to talk for a couple of moments about the FX journey. This is entitled Wellbeing and the FX Journey, just to put it in the context of Fresh Expressions, and we may or may not talk about that journey moving forward. But I just wanted to do that, and also as I do that, I want to just talk about briefly another book that we've released as Fresh Expressions in the UK. So let me just put this up on the screen. So the Fresh Expressions journey is seen in this diagram, where this has been developed over the last 20 years since the publication of a report called Mission Shaped Church Report in 2004. That report identified that new things were emerging in the landscape of the church in the UK. And this was one way to think about what was happening. New expressions, fresh expressions of church were emerging, and whilst each expression takes its own journey, there was this similarity in that journey where people were listening to the needs of their community, were listening to the leading of God, and as a response of that listening, were loving and serving and creating spaces for communities to love and serve one another. And as they did that, community began to build. And within that context, as Christians who are part of that community were just living out their lives as Christians, people started to ask questions, and discipleship was explored. And rather than those conversations leading to the question, which is a valid question, why don't you come to church? Instead of that, what was happening in these fresh expressions of church, where people were saying, what would it look like if we did church here? If church emerged in this context, that out of this community, in a way that's relevant to this community. And what would often happen is that those new Christian communities would multiply. Someone having seen what happened in that context would say, well, this is possible in the context that I'm in. With my friends who are skateboarders or surfers, or with the Wellbeing group that I'm part of. This is at the heart of the Fresh Expressions movement, this journey of listening, loving and serving, building community, exploring discipleship, and church taking shape in that context, and then seeing that happen over and over again. And what's happened in that movement is that ordinary Christians have been empowered just to be people who are able to share faith in a contextually relevant way, and to see congregations emerge, often connected with established, inherited models of church, but free from some of the barriers that stop people engaging with the faith. People are able to engage and meet with Jesus in these fresh expressions of church. So I'm not going to say any more, apart from this is explored further in this new book that we've recently launched, written by Michael Moyner from Fresh Expressions UK, and Michael Beck, who is part of Fresh Expressions in the US, 21st Century Christian, Following Jesus Where Life Happens. And I'll put a link shortly on the screen if you're interested in buying that. But as we start moving into a time of conversation, I just wondered, I'm going to bring everybody back up now, and just talk amongst yourselves for a moment. Is there anything that somebody else said, as we heard from each of you, that you want to sort of dig into and ask about, or to highlight and respond to? And I'll have a quick look at the comments as they're coming in, and we can take the conversation from here. So who wants to go first?
So many overlaps, right? I just, not having met you before, just thinking, oh yeah, look, I'm excited about that wellbeing journey, because it's getting the language out there as well, isn't it? And then you can see how a continuous space on the back of that, of actually building community around the wellbeing language, and curating your space because of that, and then maybe worshiping community building on the back of that. Woo! Yeah, I get excited about that stuff.
Where do people use? So it's going to be part of us is how many people can we get to use it? Like almost on that journey you've just given, Simon, on the Fresh Expressions journey. How many will take it further out? Because you could take it further out. And how many people just do It's really good that they'll run it as is where they are, because just what you were saying, Ruth, as well, we don't discuss this stuff enough in church.
No.
Because in local churches, we don't say enough what we're struggling with, and actually it's like taking the lid off and allowing everyone to have that conversation. So it's good in there, but that heart of how far out, where can we run this in a place that would really engage with people? As you say, what could you run off the back of it once you've got people in conversation and you've got those conversations started? How do you keep those conversations going? Yeah, your spaces sound amazing.
Well, I'm intrigued to know from both of your perspectives, Rachel and Ruth, there's this kind of idea that we can talk more about mental health. It's more in the media. It's more being discussed. Is that kind of openness being reflected, do you think, in church communities as well? Or are there areas where it's still a little bit difficult to talk about that? Or we're maybe not sure how we, we talk about, like prayer alongside mental health, and then sort of like clinical services and all those, how those two things interact. Is there as much openness, do you think, in church communities as there is in the media?
What do you think, Andy? Because having asked that question, I think sometimes you ask a question because
It's just because I'm spending less time working with churches through the work I'm doing, and I'm seeing a little bit more out in society. And I think I'm aware that we're good at talking about some things. Like I'm struggling with depression or anxiety. If I'm diagnosed with schizophrenia, maybe I'm not finding it so easy to talk about my mental health. And I think there's always kind of gradients, this kind of openness, and there's this kind of conversation about, is there more things happening, or are we more open to talk about it as well? So I was just curious.
I mean, I work uniquely with churches across the UK. We're working with over 200 churches at the moment. And I would say those churches, definitely, they want to talk about wellbeing, they want to learn. But I have to say things like, we don't say, oh, I've got physical health. It's like, we talk about wellbeing, because if we say this is a mental health thing, people go, I haven't got mental health. Go, yes, you have. We've all got mental health. It's just how are we looking after it? So actually putting some language there and saying, but I do think we've got very different theologies about what well-being is, maybe even on this screen. So actually what I said earlier about finding it a bit of a pressure word, I hate the word resilience, for example. I know some people love it. I found it an awful pressure when I wasn't well, that I felt guilty I wasn't more resilient, and I should be. So I don't think we've got a theology of shalom. I'm glad you did that, Rachel. I don't know what you think, but I think shalom should be translated well-being, not peace. I think it's a really that holistic view. But sorry, what do you think, Rachel?
Well, that's where it came from. So I feel like really it should be great if Dave was here who wrote the book. But there you are. If Dave who wrote the book was here, that would be really interesting. And his journey, how he realised this was that was the right term, and how in his own life he unpacked it. And how he found that resonated. I think we are talking about it a lot more. And I think it's part of the pandemic. The pandemic, it's one of those things, isn't it? Everybody has realised. I guess they've just got nearer, haven't they? They've felt it more. They're all going through things they maybe wouldn't have gone through. And I know that the extreme of that is really tough. So I know obviously people whose perhaps clinical mental health conditions were more under control. I think that the pandemic has meant they just can't, they've burst out, for want of a better term, and therefore churches have got more of the really tough things that are happening within their community. And then I just think there's just nobody who is untouched. And what I've really liked about, obviously, we're looking at all the different areas. So obviously people have got less physical fit. Their physical fitness has gone down. People who went to a gym regularly can't go to a gym. That is having an impact on their well-being, because it's all connected. As finances, we're going to go into financial problems, that we've got to talk about it as church, because it's going to impact loads of us. So that the security that people felt when they thought they had security in their jobs, that's going to disappear. It's going to have an impact right across the whole. So just getting it out there, getting people to have the conversation. I feel with this course, it's just a starter. I think we've had to, put lots of resources behind it, because this is not the place you will sort out your, if you've got struggling with anxiety and depression, at least you better tell people that's what you struggle with. This isn't the place to sort it out. So just cluing up leaders that they've got to have, where are you going to post people? Where are you going to get help? But I feel at least we're all talking about it.
Yeah.
One of the things I in the book that I've just mentioned, Mike Moyner talks about is democratizing the church, and I think there's a dynamic in well-being that, you know, in the past the church has often presented itself as, we've got the answers, you come with your questions and we'll tell you. And I think this is one of those areas where it's you know, we need to be, we're on this journey, well-being journey together. Come and join us as we journey together, rather than come and find the answers because we've got them and you need them. It's a different sort of dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it was really important for us in our partnerships with mental health services, because we needed them, not because we're going, oh, you're doing a rubbish job, maybe the church can do it better. We know we can't. So it's not, I say to churches, don't fill the gap, point at the gap. And ask how you can help, and actually say to mental health services, we can't do your job. Thank you that you're doing it. We're not the fourth emergency service. We're the local church, and we're also human. We're a bit broken, but what we can do is put the kettle on, get a bit of knitting on, do a bit of life, and pray. And actually, what we found is mental health services are very glad about the prayer bit. As I don't know about you, Andy, are you finding that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's often, particularly when you work, you know, like across different cultures as well, it's often the piece that, you know, like, well, can I talk about my faith and my well-being? And actually giving space to invite that conversation is so fruitful. So yeah, I agree completely.
Ruth and Andy, I was going to say, can you talk a bit more about how you do that? Because I think that would be an anxiety for a number of people about, you know, using prayer or inviting people to pray in that context. You know, just some of the ways that you're able to do that.
Andy, you go.
Well, I mean, I think some of it's confidence. So we run a little Zoom session called, you know, Connecting Faith and Wellbeing, and it's designed to give the church the confidence to say, we can talk about ourselves as spirituality experts or practitioners, because, you know, I do meet quite a lot of people who will talk about being a mindfulness practitioner who've had less training than the local vicar down the road, or even, you know, the youth leaders, you know, like, and actually, why can't we talk about it in that way? So bringing some of our expertise and trusting in that. But then also, as long as it's accessible to people, as long as there's not you have to be this, and this before you engage in this prayer or this space or this topic, actually people I find are genuinely quite open. So it's normally what we say is, find something you think you do really well, and then imagine how you would communicate that to a friend who is not from the church and doesn't have a faith, and then have a go at trying explaining that and trying that with other people. And that, you know, as simple as that, find something you do well and share it and see what happens.
Yeah, and similarly, I basically took my own prayer simple habits I'd learned when I wasn't well and just said, anyone want to do it? Firstly to my own church, then to my neighbours, and then it just grew from there. So it wasn't rocket science, and it was simplifying it down to say, you know, like, you know, extemporary prayer, the make it up yourself prayer. We think we're being like really laid back and going, you can talk to God however you like. That's scary for people. But so to say, there's some words for this, if you like, and then we take Psalm 103 verses 1-4 every single morning, and we just pray it a line at a time and leave a space. And then if you want to pray your own prayer, word or a sentence, and we leave the prayer room door open whilst we're doing it, and people who will not joining us can hear it, and then they go, oh, I might do that. And you find over about a year, and it's long term, it's slow, you find people going, I might join in. The Lord's Prayer at lunchtime, similarly, line at a time. And what happens then, if you use a pattern of prayer, it stops you just going, I want an answer, I want an answer, I want an answer to this broken thing, and you realize prayer is much more like breathing, and that God is already there. And that idea that examine is quite popular, because you're rewinding the day with God. So if you don't really believe there's a God there, you can just rewind it and look for things that are good. And eventually, when you look for things that are good, you find God behind them. So I think some people have happened upon faith by praying. So I know some Christians were a bit offended by this at first. It was interesting too. We had a good chat with our local imam about this, because he'd come along to see what we were doing. And then he'd said to me, oh, I think Jesus would be really proud of you. And I said, well, if you want to take the idea and do it. And he said, we don't want to make prayer this simple. So I said, oh, yeah, we do. So, and then I thought, oh, do we though? Because I think we like to think we can talk to him, and you can talk to him if you want to. It's almost like we haven't made it easy enough for people to join in, and we've privatized God with our language. So
yeah, and I mean, I've had some critique of our work that we're kind of stealing the silver. You know, how can you invite people to practice that or do that if they haven't had a faith journey first. And I mean, I must admit, I never thought it was mine to hold on to, but I mean, anyway, you know, I can share that experience. Sorry, Rachel.
We've done when we tried to do hope spaces last year, which is prayer spaces in community places. We had quite a lot of churches, so we just sent them like 24/7 prayer. We did it in partnership with them, just to create a prayer space for non-Christians on the high street. So taking a shop where the shop has gone, because a lot of shops have gone, popping up a prayer space in there and inviting people in to have an experience and have a go, and putting really simple resources in there. So we had a lot of interest, and then of course people kept on getting locked down. Stop, start, start, stop. But it does. I think, Ruth, some of what you're saying and Andy might really fit in those spaces as well, with the people who are trying to do that, to invite people into. They could punctuate it in the day, couldn't they, with specific times? So that it just really resonates.
Yeah.
We've had some comments in the chat box, and I'll just invite those that are watching to keep asking questions and putting comments in there. There are some practical ones. One that says they're moving to Nottingham. Ruth.
Yeah, I was going to answer that.
Sign them up.
Yeah, Jackie, really great. Yes, I'll have a look on our website, Renew 37. Oh, in fact, there's several Renew spaces. Who'd be very glad. But interestingly, not pulling you up on this at all, how would you know? We don't really have volunteers. We just have humans. So if you've got a pulse and a hobby, you can rock up. And yes, you can become a host, so you are looking after the space. But when you go in our spaces, you'll realise you have no idea who are the hosts and who are the regulars, and that's on purpose. Know them and us. So yes, please, and it would be great. Come and find us. Come and find me. I'm only there. I'm around the corner. I'm not going anywhere.
And for all of you, there's a question that Carol asked. Exclamation! Would love our town church to be doing this. Just sort of remind us again about if people, and you know, a church is only made up of the people that are, you know, that are part of that community. So if the church is going to do it, then someone needs to take the first step, and that needn't always be the minister. It can be
no, absolutely,
could be Carol. So what would you need to do, both with the wellbeing journey that Rachel talks about and the other things that you're involved in, Andy and Ruth? So go first, Rachel, if you want to.
Really simple. Go to the wellbeingjourney.org website, have a little look, and it's so simple. You download everything, but really it's where do you want to run it and how do you want to advertise it? Have you got just even 3 friends? You might ask. You could run it as a little group online with 3 of your friends and see where that goes, and ask some of your friends at church to come and do it with you, because it's going to be great for them as well. And then they might invite more friends and see where it goes. You might want to run it as a little group and then see who you want to invite. But it's really simple. It's all online, wellbeingjourney.org.
Brilliant. And Andy, I know you're based in Sheffield, but some of your resources available online?
So if you go to spacetobreatheuk.com, you can do everything from signing up for weekly kind of subscriptions to getting kind of free resources that you can go and use where you are. And I think particularly some of the models that we've tried to experiment with, feel free to try them out where you are, to chat to us about how that might work locally. You know, I think a lot of it is that sort of sense of doing the things that church and faith do well. How can I then translate them? And so if there's inspiration from that, chat to us and we'd love to help.
Yeah. Likewise, Ruth.
Yeah, so several routes in, but one is you get into it's all on the website, but just you book with us to come on a webinar, which is an introduction, and then on the back of the webinar, we'll give you the code to have the rest of the training. We ask you to make sure you've got the agreement or the backing of your church. If you're pioneers, great. You just need to have made sure you've got some safeguarding stuff in place. And then the other way in is to do it through the book. So you read it like a book group. So get hold of the book, read it like a book group, and then get in touch with one of us, and we'll through the website, and we'll help you get set up. We do ask you to sign an agreement if you're going to use our name, so that it is synonymous with good practice with mental health services. So there isn't a financial package exactly, but there is a kind of buy-in to the values.
Yeah. And I love the way, and you've all talked about this, about the sort of the partnership, the importance, and also the fact that you, because of what you're doing, has value in the wellbeing space. People are recognizing that mental health services are recognizing and partnering with you because they see it as offering value, which is great. A couple of questions here about Wendy's commented about the particular challenges at the moment. I don't know if anything, I mean, we touched briefly on COVID, but is it in terms of well-being in this time and particular things that come to mind?
I mean, I think we've tried to focus on self-awareness as that starting point. There's a psychologist called Carl Rogers that talks about the incredible paradox that it's the moment we really accept ourselves fully as we are, then we can change. And actually, again, that's one of the things I've learned from a long time being a member of churches is, faith and prayer is quite good at helping me to be self-aware. So that sort of sense of taking your pulse, how am I doing? Having processes and routines that regularly allow you to check in with how you're doing and to know what to do if there's anything you're concerned about is we found has been a really helpful starting point wherever you're coming from in the kind of pandemic and whatever's affecting you.
I think it's just opening up conversation so that people are really honest about where we are. Is a great starter. So just asking that if you're in a group with people, if you're not in a group, that is where church groups are great. So if people are watching and they're not in a group, people can all join like a they could join a midweek group in different churches. That would help. But I think if you're not, it is hard even online. I think it is really hard not having physical contact. It's a struggle. We need to talk about it. I think that's a good start. And if it's more serious, people need to have the signposts to get help. But I think the first place is let's be honest. And let's get some conversation going. And that's what I think with the course, that's what I've seen the best thing is. And then even like listening to people like, when you Kate Middleton, actually our stress levels, we're all living under a lot more stress. So our stress levels are here. So if a small thing comes along, it floods you. Whereas normally that small thing wouldn't have impacted you. But because you're here, boom, you go under and you think, why am I reacting so badly to something that normally I'd have sailed through? And it's just because our levels of stress have come up. Simple things like that, just listening to that. Tuesday night and midweek, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So having a conversation.
Yeah, it's the little things, the everyday things. It's still for me, I need to sit still. I need to hold my cup. I need to meditate on a psalm. It's not magic. I just need to do it. And if I don't do it, I need to remember there's a God who also fills the cup from the inside. And it's okay not to be okay. And actually, that's where our message is slightly different from the therapeutic pull yourself together. I think it's a message of self-compassion. Yeah. And therefore, it's beautiful that God loves us anyway. He's not going to stop. The pandemic doesn't change him. So for me, it is when the cup is empty, dirty and broken, I'm concentrating on the hands that are around the cup, which do not change the character of God. And I think that's somewhere where the church's place at the Wellbeing table is empty, and we need to be there. Because actually, like we've just personally as a family, we've just had to go into self-isolation today, and all the little things that were keeping me going, like my walk with the dog, and they are going to disappear for a fortnight now. And so I'll have to practice what I preach. Is he enough for me? So let's have a look at that. I'll tell you in a fortnight.
And I love that emphasis on self-compassion. I think is so important because there's always been a danger with the way Christianity is interpreted, that it's a little bit all about rules and the things I do wrong. But I think also within the church as well, I mean, chatting to church leaders around here recently, who I've been so proud of the church, sitting in community kind of like sessions and hearing church leaders and what they're giving of themselves. But we maybe find self-compassion quite hard because we have to give ourselves away and, sacrifice and, like taking up my cross. And actually there is also the other side of that, which is life to the full and flourishing. And so that sense of being kind to yourself, I think is such an important thing to say. And I'm so thrilled that that's such, that you said that, Ruth, because it's just, I think it's a really important thing for all of us to hear.
He does really loves us. He does really love us.
I've met with and talked with a number of ministers and pioneers over the COVID season. And there is a danger of sort of, as activists, many people in churches are activists and just doing and are giving out. And there are so many needs around us. And, it's we want to respond to that, but we need also, as you say, to be looking after ourselves and being the word that comes out of our vocabulary. And, maybe we need to translate it is grace. We need to be able to, in order to show grace to others, we need to be able to show that grace first to ourselves. And I've seen people almost feeling, well, the church down the road are doing that, so we need to do it. And almost not ministering out of who they are and what their strengths are, sort of having to go on, do stuff online or what have you. And I think we just, being able to be recipients of grace and acknowledge our need, even though it may seem insignificant compared to others. We mustn't compare ourselves. We need to acknowledge the need that we've got and allow grace into that space.
One of my little chapters in my book is called "We Are Not a Spatula," and it's this kind of idea, the language we've got of it, and God is going to really use you. And what we need to be careful is in saying this might be an opportunity for church to be planted. I believe that, absolutely. I'm longing to see renew churches. Why not plant? Why not? But we can't say this is an opportunity. This is a terrible global disaster.
Absolutely.
For which we need to find lament and give people voice for going, this is terrible and awful. And if we're going, oh, what a wonderful opportunity for the gospel, I don't know, I'm uncomfortable with that.
I agree.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for the church to be who it's called to be.
Yeah, we're out of the building. Let's not get back in.
To be a place of shalom, to be a place where people find well-being. It's not. And if we do that, that will, people will be blessed by that, and that's what the church is called to be, isn't it? A blessing to this world.
I think I've been sitting in. So there's a faith groups kind of community group on Zoom that we're sitting with here in Sheffield that's chaired by the council, and hearing the way that all faith communities. But as I said, I've been so proud of the church, because in those moments of loss and in those moments of lament, there have been people stepping up from church communities all over this area, and I'm sure all over the country, incredibly. And it's not, that's the thing that we're good at, that's the church in the community, and it's been fantastic to see that. And I think well-being just flows from that, so I think I love this conversation is really inspiring, but it's also just really encouraging that we're doing what we should be doing,
It is amazing what the church has done, isn't it? It's like, we're whizzing around with boxes, trying to feed. I mean, there's obviously more people who we could feed than we're currently feeding. And for every church, there's more that we could do. So that's why this conversation probably needs to go in balance with it, which is really where it is, isn't it? There is so much. And it's amazing what the church has done. And I'm so, as you say, just so proud of how in a short space of time, we've pivoted in a way that is unimaginable from the beginning of last year, of all the creativity online, of all the incredible things that people have done here, how we just stepped up to the challenge of making sure people have food. But at the same time, we do need that conversation, because we are struggling too. We're a people who are being faced with not seeing our friends, not seeing our family, being locked down, under more pressure, and just having that conversation that is permissive about the reality of the place in which we live.
And isn't it like making us understand that well-being is not some sort of personal self-improvement thing? That was never what the gospel was, that this wholeness of needing to be the community of shalom, but also looking after our planet, looking after our world. That I think the whole well-being thing leads the church back into embracing that language as the language of the gospel, and saying that we didn't make this language up. It's like we don't have a monopoly on the language, but we do have a God of shalom. Whereas a lot of people are just trying to be a bit more shalomy. And I think that is like, we're not just trying to make it all okay. I can't do that. I mean, I'm in awe of people who manage to do this without a God who holds the cup. I just feel like, wow, how are you doing that? Because without God holding me.
I loved what you said, Ruth, about you haven't got volunteers in Nottingham, and in any of your wellbeing centres, you've got humans. And I think, this is what we're invited into. In our journey with God, it's about becoming fully human. It's not about becoming something other than human. It's about being, fully who God has called us and created us to be. And part of that is that shalom that we've been talking about.
And if we're willing to be vulnerable, that's where our connection is with every other person around us, because we're human, and this is not okay, and I'm not okay with it either. So
We're coming to the top of the hour, and it'd be good just to draw to a close. Oh, I've got a knock on the door. I'm going to leave it. So be good to draw our time to a close. I don't know if Ruth, would you? I don't know if you've got a psalm handy as we close. I wonder whether it would be an appropriate thing just to be still and do one of those practices that we've been talking about, That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take today's psalm, and it is Psalm 4. And I've been struggling with it all week because the meditation we chose was "You fill my heart with joy." And I've had a really hard week, but let's just take a moment with that. If you don't like that one, the next verse says, "You make us dwell in safety." But actually, if joy is the fruit of the Holy Spirit and we can be filled with Him, and joy is not the same as happiness, then maybe it's okay to just take a moment, breathe in and breathe out, and know that He fills us with joy. You fill our hearts with joy. We just take a moment with that. And then we take these verses from Psalm 104, which I'll go through a little more quickly than we would. But bless the Lord, O my soul. Bless the Lord, O my soul. And all that is within me, bless His holy name. So just take a moment to bless His name. He's got you. He has the hands around the cup. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all His benefits. So just take a moment to thank Him for one thing. Porridge, forgiveness, all good. The psalm says He forgives all our sins. So we take a moment, be forgiven. Forgive yourself. Be kind to yourself. He heals all our diseases. Tricky one, but it's still true. So we bring Him the names of those who are struggling this day, either for breath or for sanity. And then it says, you redeem our lives from the pit. So to redeem is to buy back the pit, any hopeless situation. Go on, I think you can think of one. Bring it to Him, name it before Him, leave it with Him, be it a nation or a person close to home. Lord, would you rescue us? And then we end this section with this lovely image, if you like. It says He crowns us with love and compassion. So see Him come towards you with a crown for this day. And it is love, and it is compassion, and it is for you. Receive His love for you for this day. And then if you're in a renew space, I'd say the kettle's on, the activities are out, but you can stay in the place of prayer as long as you like. But I love that little habit, and if it's helpful to you, help yourself to that.
Thank you. We really appreciate it. And for all the work that all of you are doing in this wellbeing space. Bless you in that. And hopefully those that have been watching along and those that will see the recording, it's great to see Jamie, I think, saying that they'll early on came to this late, but they're going to go back and watch the beginning, which is great. So do hope this hour has been a blessing to you, and yeah, that it's hopefully inspired you in the ways that you can look after your own well-being, and perhaps journey with others too in well-being. So bless you. Thank you for watching, and take care. Bye.